Hi there, everyone. My name is Peter Dove, author of Master Dressage. Thank you very much for attending. This is lesson 3 on rising trot mechanics. So we are going to talk about the correct mechanics for you to be able to get a consistent rising trot and to be able to get control over tempo, which is one of the real benefits of having a good rising trot mechanics. Before we start, a couple of things to get out of the way. The first thing is myself, Peter Dove, Mary Wanless, Evergood Limited, or Ride With Your Mind are not responsible in any way for what may or may not happen to you when you are trying these techniques out. We try to give safety tips where we can, but obviously we're not able to give tips for every single possible situation that might occur. And you need to know your own horse before you try any of these things out. The second thing I'd say is on these first, I think, 4 or so lectures, you'll be seeing me delivering the lectures, but when it gets to the later lectures, then Mary Wanless will be coming along and we'll probably be filming it from her arena, and she'll be covering some of the more advanced lectures. So this is a collaboration between Ride With Your Mind and Master Dressage, based wholly on the techniques of the Ride With Your Mind system. So if you want to find more out about Ride With Your Mind, then just go to www.mary-wanless.com. You'll find loads of information on there, and you'll also find a page listing the Ride With Your Mind coaches that are available in the UK and in the US for one-to-one coaching. So, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Carol and Mike will make a note of the question, and either if they see fit to interrupt me, then they'll interrupt me and get me to do it there and then, or we'll save it towards the end. The other thing I'd ask is that we try and keep down the cross-chat about different techniques and different schools of riding and that kind of thing, because it can end up confusing people and detracting from the content. I don't have any problems with other riding schools and techniques and so on, but I'd like to try and keep everything as clear and spot on as I can through this session. You know, if you want to chat, you can use the Facebook group that we've set up. Okay, so we'll do a quick recap of lesson 2. The things that we covered in lesson 2 were bearing down. So that's really about getting a lot of core strength. So one of the ways you could do that was to put your fingers just underneath your sternum and make the psht sound, and you should be able to feel your stomach push against your fingers there. And if you put your fingers down bikini line level, and if you're a bloke, you'll just have to imagine, and just make the psst sound, and you'll feel that push all the way down there. Now, quite a few people had trouble maintaining that and breathing. We did a little wash-up webinar for this, so we talked about it, but one of the things you want to think about is if you take a scale from 0 to 10, and 0 is no bearing down, and 10 is you doing complete maximum bearing down, then you want to perhaps knock it down to a 6 or a 7 if you're finding it difficult to breathe. Whatever you need to knock it down to get the breathing working as well. So the other thing that we talked about was having the thigh out in front of you, or the thigh acting like a buffer. So in opposite to what I asked Millie to do, I'm going to ask you to come and stand here just so that I can show you a little thing you can try on your horse if you've got someone helping you to get the feeling of the thigh reaching out the socket. So if you can bring Tinker up to the middle. I'm sure everybody knows Millie and Tinker. They'll be using the vast majority of the lectures, certainly at the start. Perfect. So we in frame there? That's marvelous. Okay, so the idea of having the thigh out in front of you like a buffer is, and reaching into the thigh, is to help you avoid this happening in downward transitions, or if you've got a horse that might want to pull you, or if you just tend to tip forwards in front of the thigh. The idea of having the thighs out in front really helps. And one of the ways you can get a sense of that happening is to get somebody to put their hand just where your knee is, and gently try and push you back in the saddle as if they're trying to push your thigh back into the hip joint. And you want to get a feeling that you're trying to reach through here down towards the knee and resist my push forwards. And then when I let go, you're to maintain that same push, even though I'm not pushing back at you. So that's one way. Okay, do you want to walk on? Thank you very much. The other idea is the idea of, Mary calls it a slingshot. So if you imagine I think the US might call it a slingshot or a catapult. Imagine you've got the V shape of the catapult. This is the string, so the elastic coming off it, and then you'd have a little pouch. And you want to imagine that perhaps these 2 points are your knees, the elastic is your thigh, and the seat bones are the pouch, or the stones inside the pouch. And if you were to just do knees away like this, the effect it would have on your pelvis would for that to happen. If you were to just pull back with your seat bones like this, you could end up looking like this. If you get the feeling that you're reaching away from your knee and pulling back at the same time, as if somehow you could lengthen your thigh in both directions, you'll really feel your quads start to work really hard. And you'll find that the thigh stays out in front of you really clearly, like a buffer, which makes it more difficult for you to pitch forwards. And in fact, when you've got a really stable core through bearing down and your thighs out in front of you, you are not going to be shifted around very much at all. We also talked about seat bone control. So we talked about how to sit stiller by using the thighs getting snugger, the bearing down by using the muscles of the seat to control how much the horse moves you in the saddle, and that the seat bones kind of move like this, forward and in, forward and in, forward and in as you're walking along. Some people reported that their seat bones were going quite a way out, and that's usually horses that are kind of very sway-backed and are swinging the ride around like this, and you actually have to see if you can stop that from happening and stabilize your middle a little bit more so that the horse kind of walks much more in a straight line instead of kind of all of this sort of thing happening. The other issue is lazy horses, fast horses. On lazier horses, you'll probably find it an awful lot easier to stabilize yourself and sit still. On horses that are always trying to whiz out from underneath you, you're probably going to have to work really, really hard to stabilize yourself. It is possible to do this too much. I've forgotten the name of the gentleman whose video I watched, so apologies that I've forgotten your name. But he had such good muscle tone in his thigh and seat that he almost looked as if he was doing it a little bit too much. Nothing to worry about, but you could easily end up doing it too much. Blokes tend to do it too much more than ladies do. Just blokes have about 25% more muscle tone, and they're just more inclined to go with no finesse. So it is possible to do that too much and end up grinding into a halt and not allowing the horse to move on. That is the same with your bearing down as well. And again, guys kind of have this happen more often than ladies do. But just be aware that you're bearing down for the appropriate level for the work that you're doing. So, if you're riding a really difficult horse that's trying to throw you around and pull you about and move you left and right and so on, your bearing down will be significantly stronger than it would be otherwise. I wouldn't worry, the vast majority of people don't need to worry at this stage about doing it too much. Of course, you could end up stopping yourself from breathing, but you do need to think about putting quite a bit of effort into your bearing down to stabilize your position. So, I'm going to turn the board over to the next list of notes, and you can still walk on if you like, Millie. You're good stood there. Okay. Oh, and she is pretty too. Okay. So one of the things we're going to cover is really how you get your lower leg still. So there's lots of different ways people describe rising trot, and often you hear people saying stretch the leg down as you rise. And really the trouble with that is anytime you push into the stirrup, it's going to cause the leg to swing forward. The stirrup is essentially a pendulum, and as soon as you push weight into it, it's going to swing forwards like this. So I know a lot of people, I used to suffer from this too, but in fact before I met Mary, I was struggling with how do you keep your lower leg still when you're doing your rising trot, and it was so frustrating to get right. But now there's not a problem, and we'll show you how to do that. So one of the things is you don't rise by reaching into your stirrup. Essentially, what happens is the thigh, so if you imagine this was my knee, my elbow is my knee, and this is the ball in the ball and socket joint into the pelvis, and my body is kind of like stacked up like this. The knee is the fixed point of the circle, the thigh is the radius, and your pelvis essentially goes to the top of the rise and back down again, and to the top of the rise and back down. And the other thing that's important to realize is what happens is on the sit phase, your upper body, which is this arm, is inclined very, very slightly forwards on the sit. So when you get to the top of the rise, your body becomes upright, and when you get to the top, it's upright. When you get to the bottom, there's a slight incline. The success of rising trot depends a lot on your original alignment. So if you have your legs too far forward, like so, you will find rising trot really difficult, especially on the down element, because you'll literally be behind the movement and falling backwards. So I think, Millie, will you walk on for me so that I can do this little exercise in relative safety without worrying about Tinker crushing me? So hopefully, if you're all in front of your computer, if you can get off your chair and have a kneel down with me and hopefully still see what's going on the computer. This is a good description and a good exercise you can do off horse, which will really help you understand what rising trot is about. So am I still in shot here? Excellent. Okay. So you're sat on your heels. You're upright like this. Now this is really going to kill, and it is easier on a horse, I have to say. But what I want you to think about doing is levering yourself up with your thigh muscles whilst keeping your front and back the same length. So here we go. You're going to lever yourself up to the top, and then lever yourself back down again. And what I don't want you to do is to just go glunk and let go of the weight as you come back down. So keep the thighs engaged, keep the front and back the same, lever yourself up, and then back down again. And if you're doing rising trot, the sit part, you would be slightly inclined. Am I inclined forward here a bit? I think I am, aren't I? So then top of the rise and back down again. Now, do not cheat by pushing on your feet here to help yourself up. Don't push like this. And in fact, one of the ways that rising trot can go wrong is that the rider leads through their chest and kind of does this, which isn't really rising trot. The length of your front should stay the same as the length of your back as you go from the bottom to the top and back down again. So just practice that a couple of times and get the feeling of kneeling up and then kneeling down again. So, here we go. Okay, so the other thing that I hear a lot is that riders shouldn't rise very much out of the saddle, or that they should perhaps allow the horse to lift them up out of the saddle. What's really important is that you need to reach the top of the rise. Now, we'll try and demonstrate this with Millie, but essentially, if your pelvis will travel to almost over the top of the pommel. If it travels too much like this, you will be actually behind the vertical. So, it's the top of the rise, but your body should end up being vertical at the top of the rise. And then you come back down again, you're slightly inclined forward, and then you come back up to the top of the rise. So why do we do that? Well, let's ask the question, why do we do rising trot? Rising trot, we are sitting or at the top of the rise when the diagonal pair of legs of the horse hits the ground, one or the other diagonal pair of legs. Now, you won't be able to see it in this live presentation, but when we do the re-edit of this and upload it up online, I'm going to include some high-resolution footage of Millie doing rising trot in slow motion, and you'll be able to see how the horse moves and how Millie moves. So now let's say that at the top of our rise, one diagonal pair of legs hits the ground. At the bottom of our rise, the other diagonal pair of legs hits the ground. So essentially, we are either going up or down as the horse is jumping through the air. Now, should you do a tiny little rise and go up and down, hardly leave the saddle, essentially you are limiting the jump that the horse will make through the air. Now, it is possible to thrust too much. It is possible that you're putting in too much thrust, way more than the horse is giving you, and we'll demonstrate that with Millie as well. But 95% of people don't thrust enough. They don't have enough jump up in the air. The other 5% of people that are doing too much are either working too hard or are riding a horse that is literally pinging them out of the saddle. And you'll need to really control with your thighs the amount of thrust that that horse is throwing you up. So you actually have to kind of, stop the horse pinging you out of the saddle. Okay, 1 second. So one of the things we really, really need to get is a remote control to a TV, which allows me to change my notes over. So, ooh, you're a bit close. Is Millie a bit close? She's okay. Okay. And you can see her head and see her feet. Okay, that's great. So Millie knew this was the section that we were going to do the demo in halt. So we're going to demonstrate some of this in halt, and this is really helps you understand the whole idea of kneeling up and kneeling down and the mechanics of it, and also just teaching a person or helping a person to do rising trot correctly. So one of the first thing that has to happen is you must be aligned correctly. If your leg is too far forward, it won't work. And we'll show you why it won't work in a second. So let's get you back, Millie, and I want you to go to the top of the rise for me. So Millie kneels up, goes to the top of the rise. Now, this is what I want to be able to do. I want to be able to let go. No, go to the top, Millie. Sorry, and stay there. So I want to be able to let go of Millie's leg, and I want this leg to stay here. And here she is at the top of the rise, and she's balanced over her feet. Can anyone imagine what would happen now if I pushed her leg forwards? What do we think might actually happen to her? She falls straight back down into the horse's back. Okay, so go to the top of the rise. The other thing that should happen is, so here's the idea. The knee is the fixed point, the thigh is the radius. Now sit again, and then rise. Okay, that's what you're looking for, and that whole lower leg just stays there in place. Stay at the top for me this time, Millie. Good. Okay. Now, this is probably a smidge bit too far. Can you come up? That's it, a little bit less. That's perfect. Now, Millie's going to bring her seat back down into the saddle, and she's going to bring it back down. Now you can see Millie has really good control of how she brings her seat back down into the saddle. So that's really, really important. Now, can you demonstrate for me, Millie, leading with the chest and hollowing the back going up into rising trot? Okay, so this is what you want to avoid, so then come back down again. Yeah. So, guys, this is hilarious. So I'm trying to teach Millie in rising trot how to move her lower leg like this, going up and down. And after about 10 minutes, we agree that it's almost impossible for Millie to do rising trot and ride a horse while she's doing this. It seems to be an impossible coordination for you to get, isn't it? I can't do it wrong, Daddy, is what she screeched at me as she was going round. So I'm not going to be able to show you particularly doing it wrong when we're going round. You'll give it a whirl, will you? You'll give it a whirl. Okay. So once more, go to the top of the rise. Okay, great. And one of the things that I've seen people do, which is really, really cool, and again, this is something you'll have to. Can you do? Yeah, that'd be good if you held the reins. One of the things that you can do is have people trotting around and see if they can stay balanced up at the top of the rise. Okay. I haven't really tortured Millie with this, but that is something that's really useful to do, and it's the same kind of thing as practicing your jumping position, but practicing staying balanced at the top of the rise rather than falling backwards. Imagine if you're in this situation of lower leg too forwards and you're back already, and the horse speeds off, you're really just going to be left behind, and rising trot becomes really, really difficult. So go back again, and one last time just show the leading with the chest, and that's it. So this is the kind of rise you want to avoid, that you don't want to lean with the chest. Sit again. Okay, now go rise and try and keep the front the same length as the back. Okay, much harder, yeah? And then sit. Good. Okay, so whilst this seems very, very hard in the halt, you do find once you get going a trot it to be a lot easier, because the horse does in fact help by lifting you up a little bit, but you need to put in an awful lot more effort than most people do put in these situations. You've got your reins, haven't you? Good. And I think I said this last time, but whenever you make any adjustments to riders that you're teaching or helping with friends, always just ask permission if you can move their leg or touch them or whatever, and also be careful when adjusting the leg. When I reposition riders' legs and I want them to get more against the thigh, flatter against the saddle, I'll put my hand here under the knee, one hand here, and then just do a little rotation in to get the thigh to come a little bit flatter. When you do this kind of thing, always be really respectful for people's stiffnesses, and some people have very short tendons, and when you go and do this with Millie, there's hardly any sort of pressure that I have to make to make the adjustment, but for other riders, be careful that you're not pulling them around and causing them injury. So be very, very careful, and be careful with yourself too. That one of the previous exercises we did was grabbing the muscle at the back of the thigh and pulling it out of the way. Even be careful working with yourself like that, and don't over push it. Okay. What else are we covering there? Okay, so we covered the control the sit. Don't just let go on the way down. You really need to feel as though your thigh is still holding your weight as you come down and as you touch the saddle. You don't let go. If you let go, then all of your weight goes straight into the back of your backside, straight into the whole of the horse's back, and he's just going to start hollowing his head and neck, and you're going to be in all kinds of trouble. The riders often have what I call a deadening seat, so they kind of sit and there's this kind of like downward pressure as they sit, so you want to be really careful that doesn't happen. Imagine perhaps there's an egg on the saddle. You want to sit, make contact with it, and then come back up without just causing it to go splat. Some horses, and some riders too, actually have hot seats, look as though they're being pinged out of the saddle, or perhaps the saddle is a hot iron or something, and they're pinging straight out. One of the things to realize about the idea that you're either sitting or you're at the top of the rise when the diagonal pair of legs hits the ground is that it is an opportunity for you to be able to control the tempo. So you can come down and think of making a tiny little pause at the bottom of your rise and a tiny little pause at the top of your rise. It is infinitesimally small amount, but you're just trying to encourage those hind legs to stay on the ground for that little bit longer when we're talking about horses which ping you out of the saddle. The other thing that you want to think about for horses that do ping you out of the saddle is having those thighs as air brakes. So instead of the horse just letting you go fling and flinging you up out of the saddle, you actually slow down how much the horse throws you up, and that will give you control of tempo. And in fact, we'll show that in the section where we have Millie trotting around, and we can show you the differences in the camera. The other thing I wanted to talk about, gosh, your timing is so good. The other thing I wanted to talk about is hands in rising trot, and a lot of riders in rising trot have problems with the hands going up and down. And this is due to the fact that they don't open and close the angle made by the front of the arm meeting the front of the forearm here. So in rising trot, as you go up, there's got to be a slight opening here, and as you come down, a slight closing. One of the ways you can practice this is when you're in halt, and if you can find a friend, and again, be careful, but if you can find a friend who will hold a little finger up like this and get you to hold their finger, and then say to them, rise, and go to the top of the rise, okay, and then back down again, and then up again, very good, and then down, well done. And the moment they pull on you, just like, ow, just give a little squeak so that they know that they've pulled on you. In fact, actually, just having the finger there often really focuses the rider on not pulling upwards and starting to open and close their arms. So it's a really useful idea. Once they're moving, you can perhaps get them to think of two little handlebars vertically coming up from either side of the horse's shoulder that they're holding, and that they have to keep, you know, the hands in the same place and open and close the elbows. She jumped. What, because of the horse? Silly girl. Okay. So I think that's all I really wanted to say about the rising trot there. Kneeling up and down, getting to the top of the rise. I'm just going to change the board over for the next set of notes, and I guess we'll start to see some of Millie in action. So do you want to start walking around, Millie? Yep, that seems good. I wouldn't do it any tighter. Good. Okay. Bless her. Oh, so I've got some questions. Actually, yeah, let's do some questions once I've done this. That's probably good, actually. If we can get some questions out of the way whilst we're stood, that'd be great. Okay. Right. So that was Linda. So Linda asked how she can better maintain balance when she comes from canter down into trot. So there's a couple of things that people need to get into their minds when they're making transitions. The first is you really need to mentally prepare your body to move into the new way of moving. So a lot of people think kind of a bit too moment to moment, in that they think, make the transition, and then the horse trots, and then they go, oh God, I've got to get myself back into shape. So you're really going to need to increase your bear down, keep your thighs out in front of you, make the transition, and be ready out of the canter into the trot to go into rising trot. And you know, you will never just, especially if you've got a horse that's throwing you around, you will never just figure out how to go from instantly going canter in your transition into rising trot, because riding doesn't work that way. So what will happen is you'll prepare your body, you'll make the downward transition, and it becomes a game. And the game is, how quickly can you reorganize your body as you get into the trot? I play the same game, Millie plays the same game, until you become so stable and firm and so on, that is the game you're going to be playing. And you know, when a horse is as disorganized as perhaps you're describing, or as, you know, throws you around so much, it will take you a while to get stable enough and strong enough that you can survive it. Mary often says, and please bear with me on this particular phrase, it's quite long-winded. Mary says, does the organized rider organize the disorganized horse, or does the disorganized horse disorganize the organized rider? So this is kind of what's happening in your situation. You're coming from canter to trot, and the horse is disorganizing you all over the place. It's your job to try and cut that time and cut that time and cut that time, and be prepared for it and stabilize your body through it. And with a good rising trot mechanism and with the right amount of tone, you'll soon sort of slot into that pattern. But it's a game. You know, I play it all the time. It's, you know, we're going from canter to trot. How quick am I back into that rising trot? How quickly do I have control over my body? Another question? Sarah, Trish and Kareen. Sorry? uh, Right, so the thigh remains snug, though of course in the rising trot there will be the top part of it losing the snugness as you're coming up in the rise. So you are just by default snug there. It's not like you're having to put extra pressure in to be able to rise or extra pressure to be able to stop yourself from falling back into the saddle. The thigh should be snug anyway, and essentially there's a little bit of snugness there, and that kind of depends on it depends on how big your horse is, how long your legs are, and so on, as to how much of that will be snug. But your standard default snugness should be enough of a contact for you to be able to do rise and trot without having to put any extra squeeze in. Does that feel like that to you? Yeah, so but it is mostly the thigh rather than, you're not pressing in with your knees in any way, shape or form to to make that rise. It mostly comes from the thighs and the quads levering the weight of your upper body to the top. You should be snug enough for that to happen. You should be snug enough and in place enough that if you were to kick the stirrups away, your leg would keep the same angle and you would be able to do your rising trot. You can do that, can you? Oh, right. So maybe Millie says, I can do that. So maybe we'll get her to do that for you as she's trotting around and we're doing the live little bit. So I hope that's answered the question. If you are too loose, let's look at it from the other end. If you are too loose and you don't have a snugness with your thigh, how else will you be doing your rise and trot? Well, I'll tell you how else you'll be doing it. You'll be pushing on your stirrups. That's the only other answer to how to do your rise and trot. So you're either pushing off your stirrups or you already have a snugness down the thigh and the foot stays the same weight on the way up and on the way down. And that actually is something else you can monitor as you're doing your rise and trot, is how much weight is there in my stirrup and does it change on the way up or on the way down? And as I said, we will get some really high resolution slow motion of Millie doing rise and trot so you can see it. But if you have a look on the closed Facebook group, you should see a video of Millie doing rise and trot, and her other faults aside, you'll see that her lower leg is really, really still on the way up and on the way down, and it only moves generally when she wants to use it to ask the horse to walk on. Do we have any other questions before we move on? Yes. So who's that? Hetty says, where does the movement originate from? She feels as though her quads are working hard. Yes, your quads will work hard. Smiley face. and when you sit, it's going to be those kind of quads which are just stopping your upper body from just going pull it and landing straight into the hollow of the horse's back. Was that scary for her, me doing that? No, okay. Oh, okay, good. I am scary. And actually what you don't see is we've got all this cluster of cameras behind us and blinking lights and notepads and stuff like that going on. So she's being very chilled about it. In fact, I think that really is almost asleep. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so we are going to get moving, and I'm going to be talking through whilst we're videoing Millie. So just a quick warning, the view you will see will kind of get a bit shaky. You'll be a bit seasick for a minute or two until I get into the middle of the arena and can point the camera at Millie. Oh, hello. Hello. Tinker is so sweet. Okay, off you go, Millie. So we're going to have a look at controlling the tempo. We're going to have a look at use of the leg. We are going to talk about Tinker really has fallen asleep. We're going to talk about tracking up, and we're going to have a look at Millie's hands going up and down. And I might even torture Millie and ask her to stay at the top of the rise for a giggle. It's not something that I've really ever done with her. I've been always satisfied with her rising trots and never really done it, but we'll give it a go. And we'll have a look at tempo control. And in fact, one of the exercises that I always do with somebody when I teach them correct rising trot, and when I teach them how to control the speed of the horse, is we'll deliberately speed the horse up, so the tempo increases dramatically, and then I'll get them to use the thighs as brakes to slow the tempo down, to put in the little pauses and slow the trot down through their rise. Remember, by developing this level of tone in you as a rider and becoming responsible for your own weight and not getting moved around by the horse so much, you are giving yourself another tool which isn't just kick with the leg and pull with the rein. You suddenly get an awful lot more control and take away that control from the hands, so the hands do an awful lot less. So prepare to get a little bit seasick as I go behind the camera and take it into the middle of the arena. So actually, so guys, I'll give you an idea of what Tinker might occasionally have a look at here. Is this is kind of what it looks like behind the camera. So those of you that have paid for the DVD, this is being filmed by a 4K resolution low light camera, really designed to create incredible quality in these very dingy arenas. So that's what it kind of looks like from behind the camera, and at the top we've got Mike and Carol on the computer. Okay, so let's go to the star of the show, which is Millie. Right. So I'm going to go and stand at X. Yeah, I think if you take her up into trot, Millie, that would be really great. So if you keep a 20-meter circle around me, and hopefully, if I zoom in, is this zoomed in, everyone? Yeah, cool. Good. So here you can see Millie's lower leg stays directly underneath her. She's levering herself up and down. Sorry, forward and back. So the knee is the fixed point. The seat travels forward and up towards the hands, and the hands stay nice and neatly in place. Now, I would actually get Millie to be a little bit more upright. There we go. So Millie, the thigh's getting a little bit vertical, and essentially you need to use the thigh as a lever to kind of lift her up a bit more, so she comes a bit more up off the forehand. That's better. So there. So if you notice, as Millie gets to the top of the rise, she's almost upright. And on the bottom part of the rise, there's a very slight incline forwards. Now, Millie, what I want you to do is to rise less high. So just start doing a sort of really high, yes, right. And let's trot on again. So, little rise gets you little trot. Or in Tinker's case, no trot whatsoever. Okay. So this time, Millie, what I want you to do is to speed up the trot a lot. So kind of over thrust and kind of, go for kind of, really pushing her on so she goes very, very, very quickly. That's good. Okay, now apply the brakes a little bit with your thighs and slow your rise, slow your rise. That's better. So what Millie's doing here is she's not necessarily rising less high to slow the horse down, but she uses the thigh muscles to slow the speed with which she goes from the bottom of the rise to the top of the rise and back down again. So you're again a little bit thigh vertical, Millie. I wonder whether we needed your stirrups up a hole. That's better. That's better. Good girl. And the hands stay in the same place. Okay, now the final thing we're going to talk about is, so Millie, if you can bring her a little bit more up, is tracking up. Okay, so this is a good test as to whether you have enough energy going through your horse, is that the horse's hind hoof must step in the print left by the front hoof. If your horse is not pushing enough and taking a big enough stride, you'll find that won't happen. And it is tricky to see here, but I think Millie has Tinker tracking up there. I'm trying to kind of flick my eyes between what's on the screen and what's in real life in front of me, and that does look like she's tracking up. So she's really swinging underneath with the hind leg. Stay thigh out in front, Millie. So actually, Millie, do me a favor, as you're trotting along there, do too much knee down, tipping over the thigh a little bit, lower leg too far back. Okay, There we go. And then now, and then you'll notice how the thigh's gone a little bit more vertical there. Now try and go back, Millie. See if you can get the thigh. That's better. So Millie's got the thigh out in front. Good. And the horse is coming up more up on the end of the rein as well. But she's still tracking up. Now put less effort in, Millie, and hopefully what we'll get is that horse not tracking up. There we go. That's definitely... Oh, gosh, she's still managing it, bless her. That's less and less so now. So you can see how the horse is kind of losing the energy. Now, it is possible for the rider to overthrust and no energy happens. So we often see this on really, really lazy horses where you start thrusting like this and nothing's happening underneath and the horse kind of gets confused. So it's important that if you are going to create any energy, that you make sure you have the appropriate level of thrust, but you're also applying your leg as well. So, Millie, you're still a bit tipped in front of your thigh. Could you make a little correction? That's better. Good girl. So the thigh needs to be more horizontally out in front of you and thinking of levering her up through the thigh. Good. A little bit more energy if you can. You're getting dizzy? All right, go large. Well done. Okay. All right, and then come forwards to walk for me. Oh, yes, go on then, rising trot. Okay, so, sorry about this. We are going to do Millie being at the top of the rise with her stirrups. There we go. So she can stay balanced up there, balanced over her feet, and not fall back down due to gravity and go clunk in the horse's back. Okay. Do you fancy trying rising trot without stirrups? Okay, and then walk. We'll do this for a bit of fun. We haven't really... done this with Millie. So please only try this at home if you feel safe doing it. Maybe start off really slow. If you've got a really whizzy horse, don't do it. There we go. And actually, although the leg is moving a tiny bit there, it's still pretty decent. And I've never really made Millie do this before, but you know, the snugness of the thigh and the feeling of the top of the boot, the calf, being against the side should be enough for you to be able to do rising trot. Okay, and then forwards to walk. Millie's clearly not used to this. Okay, let's zoom back out there and we'll go and put the camera back. I think my arm's about to drop off. Okay. Okay, am I back in shot? Okay. Excellent. So this is a bit more this way. So this is us pretty much at the end of this session about everything I want to demonstrate here. In the Facebook group, there will be some footage put up later in the week of Rising Trot in slow motion. So we'll have to see which day that ends up being. Hopefully we can do it when Millie gets back home from school and there's enough light to do that. Or if I can find someone to point the camera at me, and I shall do a demonstration for you as well. That'll help you get a really good idea because, you know, it'll be close up, slow motion, and you can start to pick it apart. So we've got 15 minutes left, and what I hope is to cover any of the questions that people have got and demonstrate anything further if necessary. Right. Are you having trouble being on the correct... Were you on the right diagonal, Millie? Sometimes. Oh my goodness. Ah, okay. Oh, okay, okay. Hmm? Yes, yes. So one of the things about learning seat bone control and learning where your seat bones are is that you can actually start to feel which hind leg is coming underneath you. And there is no technique really other than feeling what it feels like without looking, which hind leg or which foreleg is coming forwards and coming back, having someone on the ground and seeing if you can start to call it out accurately. I think I mentioned this in master dressage, the basics. It's the same deal if you want to do things like walk to canter. Is if you want the canter transition to be as smooth as possible from walk, you're going to have to know where the legs are to give the aids at just the right moment to give the horse the best chance to strike off. So it really does just become a question of training yourself to feel which leg it is. And, you know, sometimes horses will throw on one diagonal or the other, depending on their preference. You'll just naturally want to start rising and you feel it's wrong. So you look down and notice it's wrong. But yeah, there's no quick technique that I know of. I'll have to ask Mary if she knows of something. But it is one of those things of walking around, moving up into trot, stay sitting a few strides, try and get a feeling, and then rise up on a particular forward motion of the side of the horse. Sorry I can't be any more help from that, but it is just a question of practice. And it's almost, it's like the game from canter to trot. You know, there's no specific technique to suddenly give you control of your body from canter to trot. It's just a game of how quickly can I get my body back under control. And, you know, really sussing getting on the correct diagonal is, can I look up and feel what my pelvis feels like underneath me and then rise at a particular feeling and look down and get it right. So yeah, it is just kind of practice and feedback from the horse and from someone on the ground. Tinker's going to squash me. Do we have another question? Okay, so is that Kayla? Kayla's saying that when she makes a transition, she finds that her foot comes out of the stirrup when she's bearing down. I assume she means foot rather than knee. Yeah. Okay. So what happens basically when you lose your stirrups or your foot comes out of the stirrup is this angle here ends up closing. So the angle made by the front of your body coming to your upper body closes. Now, in actual fact, this angle here likes to stay the same no matter what. She says, "What are you doing?" So, if you sit like this, round backed, and you put your thigh more vertical, your upper body will want to do this. And then when you sit up, your knee will want to do that, and this angle likes to stay the same. So having that feeling of the thigh reaching out of the hips joint, as if you could somehow pull the thigh bone out of the hip joint and reach it away from you, should help you if you think of that in the downward transitions of having the knee reaching away. Because essentially, you know, foot coming up out of the stirrup is probably knee coming up as well. So I mean, I don't know what happens in your downward transitions, and we are going to talk about transitions as a separate lesson, but sometimes people lean back, and of course if you lean back, then this angle likes to stay the same. You lean back and your knee will come up and you'll lose your stirrup as well. So just check out what's happening to your knee and to your thigh when you're making the downward transitions. Does the thigh stay out in front of you? Yep. Yep. If what's going forward? Oh, okay. Yeah. So so the question is from whom? So Yvonne is saying, if your upper body goes forwards when you're trying to lever yourself up, is it because of the strength in your thigh and core? It probably is. Do you want to walk on, Millie, so I can do this kneeling down thing? Come on, my dear. Good. I tell you what's really good for the thighs is that whole standing up against the wall like this. With your back up against the wall and being like that. But anyway, let's do the whole kneeling down thing again. The killer is doing this, is the levering up to the top and then back down again, having your body remain upright all the way. In rising trot on a horse, it's a little bit easy because we are allowed to be slightly inclined on the sit, and then get to the top of the rise, and then come back down again. And you know, if you move between those two modes of being upright and then levering yourself to the top and then lowering your upper body down, ow, 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 that really hurts the quads an awful lot. And then if you just pitch forward a tiny bit and then go to the top and then back down again, you do find it's an awful lot easier on the quads. So don't worry if you are a little bit tipped forwards. You are allowed that kind of slight incline on the sit, but then you're kind of almost upright when you get to the top of your rise. Hope that's answered the question. It is an awful lot easier when you get on the horse, let me tell you. But it's important to have the idea that the lower leg is underneath you. And actually, if you re-watch on the replay and perhaps the clip that I put up as well, of Millie doing the rising trot where she's, you know, balanced over her feet, the lower leg stays stable back underneath. And that is, you know, really one of the prerequisites in rising trot is that the lower leg must be underneath you. You must be balanced over your feet. If you're starting off from this position, I mean, can you imagine the amount of haul that you have to do to get yourself up? And you may end up using the reins to do it. And what happens on the way down? Well, you know, if you're on the way down, then, you know, you're going to fall backwards and land. And maybe this is why people were, you know, being advised not to rise very high and just come out of the saddle a little bit, because, you know, if they didn't, then they'd fall backwards and go crush into the horse's back. Do we have any other questions at all? The length of the stride versus tempo. So, essentially, in rising trot, you will control the speed with which you go from the bottom of the rise to the top. And the top and the bottom always happen at the same speed. So you're setting that speed by the virtue of your rise. So the question was, how can you control the length of the stride as opposed to tempo? Well, in actual fact, you have to be able to control the length of the stride. You have to have tempo in the first place. You have to have tempo control. This gets a little bit tricky, but essentially you need to be able to apply a little bit more leg and ask for a little bit more energy, and the horse will make a bigger jump for you. And that bigger jump will end up being a longer length of stride. So, you know, I've taught Millie, actually I think there is a video on the forum of me teaching Millie, and I said to Millie, can you arrange tracking up? And what she had to do there was actually to put a little bit more thrust into the rise and use a little bit more leg, and that generated the bigger jump from the horse. And you know, you might have to put in that little bit more of in the rise, that little bit more thrust to get the horse to jump as well. You know, the amount of thrust really does kind of equate really well to how much movement there is in the horse's hind legs. But anyway, you should be getting from the bottom of the rise to the top regardless of that. So that should be the same. Then using your leg will ask the horse to make bigger jumps and for it to take longer strides. And whenever you're teaching a horse to have more cadence in the trot or to have more thrust up, I sometimes feel as though on the way up I'm just lengthening the amount of time I'm up in the air for that tiny bit longer, as I'm encouraging the horse with my leg to make that bigger jump up into the air. So yeah, you know, on the bigger horses with the bigger thrust, with more bounce and more cadence, and when you're doing medium trot, for instance, you will feel as though, you know, you're coming out of the saddle more, you're getting a bigger jump, a bigger thrust. The thing to realize in situations like lengthened strides, when you're trying to do medium trot or lengthened stride or extended trot, is your tempo has to stay the same, but you're probably increasing the amount of thrust as you go through the air, and you probably feel as though you're traveling more in the rise too. Hello again. Oh dear. Poor you. Just wait till you get to the canter session. Any further questions, Your Honour? Oh, that's a really good one. So quite a few people want to know the difference between a gripped knee and a snug thigh. Well, it all really kind of depends on where you're putting the pressure. So the snugness of your thigh very much depends on the saddle that you're sitting on, the shape of the horse that you're sitting on, and so on. But if my hands are your thighs and where my fingers meet are the top of your thighs, the pressure kind of comes like this. It isn't pressing the knees in and causing the thigh to come away at the top. So the snuggest area, and if we were to split it into thirds, you'd have kind of where your knicker tendons are down to about here, and then to here, and then finally to where your knee is. Your top third will be snugger than the second third, and the second third will be snugger than the third third. In other words, where your knee is. Some saddles will not allow your knee to be snug. And it's really important that you don't force that to happen. As long as you're snug round about sort of here, if the knee's not there, it's fine. Because some horses, some saddles, some riders' thigh lengths will just not allow the knee to be on. So the opposite would be kind of like if you were doing racing or you were in a cross-country seat where you would go more knee in and the seat would be out like this, and then you'd be in your jumping position or cross-country position or racing position. That's a different scenario altogether. One of the biggest things that I think has taken a long time for people to get is dressage position does not translate to jumping position, and jumping position does not translate through to dressage position either. When you're in your jumping position, your leg will be further forward, full stop. It has to be further forward. Do not go into a jump in your dressage position. Please do not go into a jump in your dressage position. The horse stops and you'll just go, wah, straight over the front. Also, you'll go into jumping position and you'll be like this, because essentially when you go into a jumping position, you're not balanced over your feet. All right? With your leg further forward and your heels down and your knee more secure and so on, when you go into your jumping position, like so, you're then balanced over your feet. With your legs back here underneath you and you go into jumping position, you're going to be in really big trouble. So that is kind of, you know, why the difference there. Did I answer that question? I felt I got a bit off track. So the question was again? Oh yes, the grip, where the snugness happens. Okay, yeah. So snugger at the top of the thigh. It's kind of almost like a peg going onto a clothesline snugness. You know, the kind of pegs, that kind of shape, and you're snugging on like that. You know, you're not pinging yourself up off the top of the horse. It's more you're kind of snugging down and on, the kind of sitting deep sense. You know, you ought to be able to feel your seat bones. You ought to be snug down the inside of the thigh. And essentially by doing that, we're being responsible for our own weight. The moment you go bleh with the thighs and relax and take them away, then you've just relegated the entirety of your upper body weight straight down into your seat bones, straight down into the hollow of the horse's back. And should, God forbid, any acceleration or deceleration occur, the only means of support would be on the reins. So by getting snug, by sitting still, by having bearing down, doing all those things, you're turning your body into a tool which can mold the horse's back, mold its tempo, mold the amount of energy that you're channeling through it. And when we get into the lesson on turning, you'll see what a huge difference being snug makes, because it creates a narrow corridor down through which you can steer the horse's shoulders, rather than the horse weaving around like that for you. She all right? I'm very scary. Tinker is quite a funny character. She's yeah, she finds kind of, she looks at humans and kind of, oh God, it's a human, what's it going to do? Her sister, on the other hand, who's currently away from in training, Lottie, she's like a puppy. You wouldn't think they were sort of half sisters at all. Lottie just comes up to everybody and wants to look at everything. If Lottie saw these cameras, she wouldn't run away. She'd probably go up and try and lick them and eat them and find out what on earth they were. But she's doing really quite well at the moment. Any other questions? Oh gosh. See, I mentioned that, didn't I? I did mention that. Oh, good Lord. Who's that? Juliana. So, Juliana, curse you for picking me up on it because it is more of an advanced lesson. But Juliana wanted to know about the levering the horse up with the thigh. Okay, so would you like to walk on just so I get a little bit more room there? Oh, go on. Tinker certainly doesn't want to move. Come on. Oh, I'm so sorry, Tinker. It's so cruel. I feel really mean making Tinker stand here all the time because it does get her comatose, and then we ask her to move on. So, levering the horse up off the forehand with the thigh. Let's just say, are we all right, Mike? It's going. Oh, it's fine. If it's going, if the other side's lit, we're all good. Okay, sorry about that. We had a battery situation going on, but it's all fine. Okay, so let's kind of see what tends to happen with a rider when the horse goes on the forehand. The horse's weight will go onto the forehand. Often the rider gets tipped onto the forehand, and the thigh becomes rather too vertical. And if you think about what's happened with the horse, basically it's gone croup high, the weight's gone down the front, and it's kind of like a seesaw. So it's gone bum up, weight down to the forehand. By thinking of using the thigh as a lever to lever up the front end, essentially what you're doing to yourself is you're kind of going more bum back down, more thigh out in front of you, back to being more upright, rather than being in this kind of position on the horse. And by doing that, you'll kind of push the back end down and make room for the front end to come up. And then with a little bit of leg and good tempo control, you can bring the horse more up in front of you. Occasionally lifting the hands a little bit helps, but it's not the solution. The lifting up the hands helps a little bit, but if you're not doing everything else with the thigh and your leg and having tempo control to lever the horse up, it won't work. You'll just end up holding up your horse's head with your hands. So it has that kind of seesaw idea, and I bet if you watch back the video and you saw the bit where I said to Millie about levering, you'd probably see that her thigh was more vertical than when I asked her to lever the horse up. And essentially, you're activating your quad muscles to lift the horse up. Normally, when you've gone to kind of vertical with the thigh, it's the hamstrings that have tightened up and the knee's gone down. So kind of by activating the quads, you're bringing the almost knee up, bum down, and bringing the horse up out in front of you. So, but that is fairly advanced, because really what that assumes from the rider is that they can generate energy when they want. They have excellent tempo control. So, when they use their leg, the horse doesn't just speed off. And that they've got control of their hands and the rest of their body and so on. So, it's quite an advanced thing, but it really, really does work. I remember having a very on the forehand mare to ride. I'd got to the stage where I was able... No, it wasn't. It was way before this one. I'd got to the stage where she was round, she was working up over her back and everything else, but I couldn't control the tempo all the time, and she would start sort of running and leaning, and I couldn't really work out what on earth was going on. And I went for a 4-day course with Mary, and Mary described it to me. And one of the other things she described is, she said, imagine you're trying to paste the forehand of the horse up that bit higher, as if it was in Photoshop and you could suddenly paste it up. And I tell you what, it killed my leg muscles, but it worked immediately on that horse. Until about the 4th day, I think, and Mary said, leave her up, and the instruction went from my brain to my legs and nothing happened. The thighs were dead. So it is really hard work on the thighs, but it's a great way of bringing the horse up in front. Hope that's answered the question. It is, it presupposes a number of biomechanics things going correctly. How are we doing? Anything? Yes. So, yeah, Deborah was sort of saying that, you do have to train the horse. So, I think first of all, so you do have to use your leg. I mean, we'd even consider using your leg as something biomechanical. But you are right that you do have to train your horse. So some of the things that one of the reasons why I went over whether the horse was tracking up or not is because it's one of those things that, you can get your body as correct as you want, but if there isn't enough energy going through the system, if the horse isn't active enough, then it might not work as well as you want it to. So, there's a number of things that you have to think about in terms of the horse's energy levels, its reactivity to your leg, and so on. But, Mary says there's several training kits. The first is what she calls kind of like ground zero, which is groundwork with the horse, getting the horse to respond to, you stopping it to going from the stick, from your aids, any of the groundwork you're doing, ground zero. The next is what she calls the first toolkit, which is basically rider biomechanics. It's your body, getting your body in the right place and so on. And then the second training kit is the school movements and how you go about training the horse and so on. So, biomechanics and understanding that allows me to say to Millie, can you arrange tracking up? So if you watch that video of Millie trotting around and you heard me say, can you arrange tracking up here? You didn't hear me tell Millie how to do that or anything like that. That's because she understands biomechanically how to make that happen. And at that point, we're training the horse. But it is no good to say to a person, more impulsion or more leg or more this, if by their mechanics of how they're going about that they're achieving the wrong result, that the horse is lengthening underneath, that it's hollowing its back and speeding off with its legs. So there is you do need both sides of the coin, but unless you're biomechanically correct, then often what happens is your aids and whatever it is you're doing on the horse have unintended consequences. Okay, are we almost done there with the questions? That's fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody, for spending time here watching the webinar live with us. I hope the technical issues were cleared up. Everything seems to be running fine from our end. In the next few days, you will find a high-resolution version of this video being uploaded, and we'll put the link in the Facebook group so that you can watch it in high resolution. We'll put up the date for the next lecture soon. We still want to... You were there. We still do want to do a reshoot of lesson 1 and lesson 2 so that we can record them in the high resolution that you see up here. So we'll let you know when that date occurs too. If you've been following, you'll know that I've asked people to put some comments in for extra bits of video that you want to see and anything that you want demonstrating. And sometimes when I see people's homework, it inspires me to come up with a short video as well. So finally, before you go, homework. What I'd really love to see is rising trot mechanics at halt and rising trot mechanics while you're trotting around. Basically take a video, create yourself a YouTube account, upload the video, and then you should get a link to which you can post in as a comment to the homework post that I'm going to create. Hello, my dear. Yes, humans. So yeah, that's it on the homework. Love to see it. Basically, as soon as I see your videos going up there, I'll start making some comments. I've got some homework from lesson 1 to catch up on, homework from lesson 2 from when people have posted a bit late. But don't worry, if your horse is lame or if you can't do it right now, I'll still always look at your homework whenever it is you get round to posting it. So thank you very much from me. Thank you very much from Millie and Tinker, and thank you very much for joining from Carol and Mike behind the cameras.